on those. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop those questions into the chat and we'll get to them by the end of the presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in a check-in link as well if everybody could check in. And I'll go ahead and let you take it away, Megan. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, glad to be here. I went to the University of Florida for grad school, so have a really great connection with all of the Florida schools and love doing any presentations or recruiting based in Florida. My name is Megan Kozel-Ream. I am one of two assistant directors of admission at the University of Minnesota Law School. And so today we'll do a little bit of a presentation on Minnesota law before the personal statement presentation. And my goal is to give us at least 20 minutes for questions. So I'll speed through a little bit so that way we can get to what's most relevant to all of you here today, your questions. So I'll focus on some highlights of Minnesota law, the application, a little bit on financing, and then the Twin Cities, as I don't expect all of you have been up to Minnesota before. So we are a top 10 public law school. We have a full-time JD program. Our alumni are all across the country and in 81 different countries as well. And despite being a public law school, actually our student body is not primarily from the state of Minnesota. About 70 to 75% of our students every single year are from outside of the state of Minnesota. So we do not have any quotas or requirements of how many students need to come from the state, unlike some other public institutions. And so the vast majority of students who are joining us didn't know anybody before starting at Minnesota Law. So there really is that sort of first week of school getting to make your friend groups right at the beginning. Everybody's in the same place. We're really known for our experiential learning, first and foremost being our clinic offerings. So clinics, you get to basically act as an attorney under a supervising attorney. And our clinics are focused on a variety of different topics, and some are at the trial level and some are at the federal level or the appeals level. So depending on what your interest is topically or what type of practice you would like to go into in the future, there's probably a clinic for you. This is something that you would do in your second and or third year of law school. And it's not particularly competitive here to get into a clinic. About 2/3 to 3/4 of our students do a clinic at some point in time. In addition to our clinics, we are really highly rated in practical training. We have a law and practice class that all of our first year students take. And that is a pass-fail class where you go through all of the steps of being a lawyer, both on the law side and on the litigation law side. So you'll interview clients, you'll do an oral defense in front of an actual judge who will give you feedback. We'll bring in lawyers to also help coach you in different ways. You'll write a contract. So really trying to give you the skills in that first year and allow you to feel confident going into your first position during your first year of summer. We have a variety of experiential learning courses beyond that first year. And one of the ways that our students get really engaged in experiential learning are through our externships and field placements. We have a really great judicial externship program where you get matched with local judges either at the federal or state level. And we also have a variety of really great corporate externships, partnerships with companies like Land O'Lakes Butter or Great Clips. And what's really nice is if any of these positions offer you pay, you can take the pay and receive class credit at the same time. On the more traditional academic side, we do have 12 concentrations. Concentrations are like a minor in undergrad, where it's optional if you would like to have one. There is a variety of different students who choose not to concentrate, and that's totally fine. But this is a way of also highlighting we have a lot of course offerings, both traditional lecture style and experiential opportunities in these particular areas. We're a little unique in that our second year students are required to either be on a moot court or a journal. So moot court is like mock trial on the appeals level. And then our journals have a write-on process. So at the end of your first year, you would take 2 to 3 weeks to write a note, do some citation reviews, and based on how you do at that point in time, that determines whether you would be on a journal. Some places do it based on what your grades are. So if you're interested in journals as you're exploring different schools, it's important to ask that question too of how you get on a journal. We do also have study abroad opportunities. I will say not too many students choose to do study abroad. Typically, they would do it their second semester, second year, or first semester, third year, just based on what hiring timelines look like. Most of our programs are over in Europe and a few in South America. At the end of the day, the JD program is a professional program. And so your career is the focus of your studies and our support throughout your time. So at the very beginning of your time here, you will be paired with a career counselor. We have 5 different career counselors, and then we also have a team that go out and talk to the different law firms, whether that be big law or small law firms, talk to the nonprofits, really talk up Minnesota law students. And we have a really great bar passage rate and job placement rate post-graduation. If you're looking to go into judicial clerkships, we have great clerkship placement rate as well, and we have a designated judicial clerkship career counselor. We also have a dedicated public interest career counselor as well. Our top markets the past few years have been California, DC, Illinois, New York, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and this last year, Texas was a new one that was higher for us. About half of our students each year do choose to stay in Minnesota post-graduation. But this slide shows a little bit more of the range of locations where students have gone past in the past 3 years post-graduation. So the vast majority of the 50 states have a recent grad from Minnesota. And I also like to just highlight the fact that our students aren't going into one particular type of legal job post-graduation. There's not a pressure to go into one particular type. Only about half of our students go into a traditional law firm post-graduation, and then 25% complete a judicial clerkship. There's also a significant portion of our students that go into public interest and government-related positions, and a few go into business and industry, working in-house at a business. And every other year, we have somebody that goes into education, so teaching post-graduation. And moving into a little bit of applying to law school, if you haven't already, creating your free account on the Law School Admission Council is a great first step. That's where you would register for the law school admission test. They do have some free resources for LSAT prep. We always recommend, since they have 4 free practice tests, that you take at least 1 practice test on their platform, because it's the exact same software that the actual LSAT is administered on. So it allows you to see all of the functionality, like hiding different options as you're ruling them out or things of that nature. So it's not a surprise of how to work the system when you come to the actual test. I'll also note too that we have a number of law school forums hosted by the Law School Admission Council that are digital. So October 14th is the next one. There's also one in November and in February. That's a great way to interact with a lot of law schools all at once, get great information. Most law schools have a Zoom room where you can meet with admissions professionals or current students. For the application itself, it is rolling admissions. We opened on September 1st. And with it being rolling admissions, we really do recommend, if at all possible, that you apply by November 1st. That is considered early in the cycle and puts you in the best possible position to get that vote of admit and to get higher scholarship consideration. If you can't get it in by that time, no need to fret. But I would say if you are looking at applying after the new year, that's where I would start having conversations one-on-one with students about what makes best sense for them, because it does get a little more difficult to get that yes out the gate or to get as much scholarship funding as you otherwise might have been eligible for earlier in the cycle. We start sending out decisions typically around January, so those who apply really early might not have that typical 6 to 8 week turnaround. But as we get a little later in the cycle, we're issuing decisions as we're reading files. Within the completed application, there's the personal statement, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the resume, your completed credential assembly service report. That's on the Law School Admission Council website. That's the only way we get your LSAT score, your transcripts, and we require one letter of recommendation, take up to two. We also do offer to all students an optional virtual interview. That's a one-way interview. We do fun icebreaker level questions. So we rotate them every year and even typically each month throughout the cycle. Last year, for example, in October, one of our questions was, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, where would you go first and why? So it's that level of question, really just to get to see a little bit of how would you interact in an interview process or with clients. At the end of the day, while numbers do matter in the application process, I always like to say when we talk about holistic admissions, we're looking at, are you going to be able to pass the bar in the future and get a job? At the end of the day, it's a professional program. And so our goal and your goal is getting the job. And so the numbers really only speak to your potential to pass the bar, but all of the other elements of your application speak to, are you going to be employable? How would you do in an interview process? What would you be like working as a summer associate, for example? And so those are your places to really show your personality, your maturity, and really shine. On the financing side of things, because we are a public school, we do have a difference between in-state and out-of-state. It is unfortunately very difficult to get reclassified as in-state. So anybody coming from out of state, you will stay non-resident through your 3 years. If anybody happens to be living in Wisconsin that's on this call, you would also qualify for in-state tuition, as well as anybody who would have GI benefits. In terms of scholarships, we range from $5,000 to full tuition. Those are awarded at the time of admission, and there's no GPA requirements to maintain your scholarship through the 3 years. It's news. Average scholarship is half off. Our scholarships are very heavily numerically based on your LSAT and undergraduate GPA. 93% of our current students have a merit scholarship. Those that don't typically are our transfer students, those that are coming in with full GI benefits, so tuition is covered anyways, and those getting off the waitlist later in the cycle. A good number of our students do work on campus to help defray some of the costs as well. And our all of our students working in the law school actually have a union as well to help represent them and bargain for all of their benefits. So like I said, I don't expect that anybody has necessarily been to the Twin Cities area. So the Twin Cities is quite literally 2 different cities within about 15 minutes of a drive. So featured in the top image is the skyline of Minneapolis. Minneapolis is where the law school is based. We are a very, very short train ride away from downtown and right along the Mississippi River. We are also right across the river from the main undergraduate campus. So that's all right there for you, but you wouldn't be in the midst of the undergraduate campus. We are also really known for being quite outdoorsy for an urban area. So we have really great biking, really great park systems. And I would say as somebody who's living out in the suburbs, it's really easy to drive around, but there is also really great public transportation. The Mall of America is right here. Good sports, good arts and entertainment. And then St. Paul is the other major city in the Twin Cities, and that's where the state capital is. So we have every level of court besides the US Supreme Court within the Twin Cities area. So really great place to practice law. So that's a little bit about the University of Minnesota itself. And I'll drop this email and my email in by the end of this time. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment just to pull up the next presentation as well. And of course, right now I have to re-sign into it. So give me one moment here while I share the screen. Perfect. So the personal statement focus, I will talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts, but also give some potential brainstorming starting points for you as well. So if you need a moment to pull up a place to write notes, either pen and paper or your notes apps, feel free to take a moment to do that. But the personal statement itself will vary potentially school to school. So there are some things that are generally applicable to personal statements. But I also really want to emphasize from the beginning that it's really important to take a look at each school's directions. Most schools have about a 2-page personal statement, but there are some schools that accept up to 4 pages of a personal statement. And some schools will have very specific topics that you need to address. So when we're talking about crafting your personal statement, there might be certain stories that would be generally applicable depending on what that particular school wants in the personal statement that you can recycle and repurpose with some of the other points that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily thought of initially to put in a personal statement, depending on the school. And I like to describe this as your interview, essentially, for law school. So thinking of it like an interview for a job. So we should learn a little bit more about you than we can see elsewhere. So it shouldn't just be a regurgitation of your resume, though it's totally fine to talk more in depth about work experience. And you also want to make sure that it is still personal. It doesn't have to be an essay level type of writing, but you don't want to be an oversharer. You're not talking to a best friend in this. You are talking to somebody that would be like your boss effectively. So keep it professional while also personal in tone. And I wanted to just show that there is not one topic that gets the yes. So you don't have to have had any prior legal experience and talk about that in your personal statement. So I wanted to highlight a few personal statement topics of those we admitted last year. And this is even only a small sample of those that we admitted. So anything from something more common like working as a paralegal to how love of poker related to their love of learning, which related to the love of law. So a very, very wide range of topics that could lead you to a yes, provided that, again, it's personal and it does connect back to law at the end. So like I said, we'll talk a little bit about some ways to start brainstorming. And so at the core, your personal statement should address why are you interested in law? Or perhaps if that's a hard question to answer, how do you want to use law or what do you want to accomplish with law? And so think of this as if you came up to my table at a law fair and I asked you that question right then and there, what would be your 1-minute response to me on what do you want to do with law? And it's okay if you don't know, for example, that I want to be an environmental lawyer who works for a nonprofit. You don't have to have that level of specificity, but having some idea of what is the difference between being able to practice law versus being a social worker or maybe teaching, making sure that in your personal statement, it is clear that this is the best job for you and your goals. And so I'll just note that many personal statements talk about wanting to help people. And so being very specific that this is the particular way that you want to be able to help people. Another general topic to think about when brainstorming would just be some adjectives that your best friend would use to describe you. Perhaps you're somebody who is always a talker. You're very outgoing. And that might be something that could help direct the way that you want to approach your personal statement. Or maybe you're somebody who's always organized. You have color-coded spreadsheets for everything, very detail-oriented, and that's just very inherent in your personality and how you approach work. So come up with a few adjectives that those who would know you best would use to describe you. Again, don't think about necessarily how this relates to law yet. And then what are some things that you are passionate about? And these don't have to relate to law. So maybe you love the TV show Survivor, or maybe you are really into Sudoku puzzles or knitting, or you're training for a marathon. Anything that you are passionate about that you are spending your time doing, write those down. And then once you have those, that's when you can start going, do any of these maybe connect to law? Can any of these adjectives help describe how I will be as a lawyer? So if you are that talkative person, maybe that's something that you can highlight in how you would approach client interviews, and how you make people really feel comfortable in a conversation. Or if you are that very detail oriented spreadsheet person, maybe you can talk a little bit about how being very detail oriented in your written work is going to be something that you bring to the table. On the passions side of things, I've read many great personal statements that focus on a passion that doesn't necessarily immediately scream law. Really remember one from a few years ago that talked about being really into studying genealogy, and how going in and researching facts and being able to sift through how does this person maybe connect to this person or not, do these facts match up, um, is something that they like to do for fun, but want to bring into their career as well. And that's where law started to come in. So these don't necessarily have to be the starting point for your personal statement, but could be a way of approaching it if you don't necessarily immediately have an idea of an experience that you want to highlight. And that's where we get to the final major brainstorming, which is what makes you different. And whether or not you feel like you have that difference, you do. So it could be a travel experience, some volunteering work that you do. Could be something as simple as what are your personal goals for the future? Some highlights from your college or work experience. And then also, if you want to share any difficulties that you've overcome, this could be a space to do that. But it's always up to you how much you want to share. You do not have to feel forced to share something very difficult in these personal statements. And I'll note if you do talk about something that is a difficulty that you've overcome, it's really important to stay positive through it. So stick to the facts of the difficulty, but focus a lot on what have you done since that point. Highlight your positive personal traits. I know a word that often gets used is resilience, for example, but maybe there are other things too tied into how you've overcome that difficulty if that's a route that you want to go. Um, but again, it doesn't have to be an earth-shattering, brand new statement that we've never read before. I will say, though, the folks that try so hard to be different and show us something that we've never seen are the ones that we remember, but in a bad way. I had read a personal statement one year that was all about learning to drive stick shift, which is a really interesting skill. I can't do that myself, and I think it could have made for a really good personal statement. But the entire personal statement was only about learning how to drive stick shift, and there wasn't any tie back into law. And so that was one that fell short. Or I read one that was so poetic about going camping in the Grand Canyon and then this big snafu of the water rising, and used really, really flowery language. It was beautifully written. If I were reading a novel, I think that would really draw me in, but it didn't hit right for the purpose of a personal statement. And I was just on a panel with George Washington Law School, and one of the admissions folks there was saying they get a number of personal statements every single year that folks try and write it like they were submitting a legal brief. And so you don't have to try and be creative and have this thing that we've never seen before. Oftentimes it does land a little flat. So just be you, and it's okay if it feels like just a just a good personal statement in your mind and not something extraordinarily. We do read very similar topics year on year, but at the end of the day, you are doing your job well if you are inserting your personal experience, even if it's a pretty common topic. So bringing some of those brainstorming ideas together, your personal statement should tell a story of you and your interest in law. And so what traits do you want to highlight about yourself? What experiences do you want to share? I would say if you're doing multiple experiences, really 2 experiences tend to be all that really fits well within a 2-page personal statement. you don't want to have so much in there that every single paragraph is something new, because that starts to feel like a recycling of a resume at that point. So dig deep into one or two personal experiences if you're going that route. And at the end of the day, your why law should shine through. I shouldn't be left at wondering, why does this person want to go to law school? I've read all of their application materials and they seem like a really good student, but I don't understand why they are applying to law school versus applying to a different graduate program or going on to a different career path. If you're still stuck and have multiple ideas that you're trying to weigh out, there are a number of ways that you could diagram what things connect well with one another. And if you're stuck between two major ideas, a lot of folks that I talk to are typically stuck between personal background and more work experience. And so it's worth looking into, does the law school that you're looking to apply to allow you to have an optional statement? Because that typically is a better place if you're between two topics to put your personal background in more of the optional statement, to talk about your unique perspective and allow your work experience to be the core of your personal statement. If you aren't allowed to put in that optional statement, or they have a limit on how many optional statements and you need to use that space for somewhere else, then at the end of the day, another thing to think about is, how long ago in the past am I talking about? Because we are looking to admit you right here, right now, not 5-year-old you, not 10-year-old you. So if you are talking about personal background, you need to also bring it to the present day as well. So a few other things to brainstorm at home. Do you have any red flags or anything that you think the admission committee might pause on? Be that poor grades. And what do I mean by poor grades? Maybe a semester that it is very clear that your grades are lower than the rest of your time. Or maybe you did get a D or an F on a certain class. Poor grades does not mean somebody who has been a really, really strong student, A's all around, and they got 1B in a class. I have read a supplemental statement talking about why they got 1B in a class. We do not need that level of a supplemental statement. But something more serious like academic probation would definitely need a supplemental statement. On the character and fitness side, anything ranging from something very serious like a DUI to something that we get a lot, a speeding ticket. You might have to highlight on some applications exactly what caused you to say yes on a character and fitness question. Or another thing is, if you have a thinner resume, is that something that you might need to address as well? So the supplemental addenda are where you can highlight a little bit more about this. And again, stick to the facts as best you can. So for example, using one of the more serious ones, if you are somebody that had a DUI, talk about when did it happen, where did it happen, what were the consequences, like did you have to pay a fine, did you have to complete a class, and then what have you done since then to ensure that this would never happen again. That should be the framework. Don't focus so much on the storytelling of that moment when everything happened. Talk about more what has happened since that point in time while giving us the basic facts that we would need. And so this is your space to allow us to not have any questions on the reviewer side. Don't leave us guessing what happened in a particular semester or why you don't have as much on your resume. If there is anything that you think could be a red flag, use the supplemental statements to expand a little bit for us. I would also say, once you have some of your topics in mind, or if you're still struggling, just chat with some friends and family too. What are some words that they would use to describe you? Is there a particular story that you've shared in the past that really resonates with them, that makes them go, yes, I can see you as a lawyer, for example? Those might be good places to help you start thinking about a good topic for your personal statement. And then at the end of the day, just start writing. And my typical advice is, don't write your intro, don't write your conclusion. Start with a middle paragraph. Treat every paragraph at first as your middle paragraph, and then go back in and craft that opening and that conclusion. As I know myself as a writer, if I am sitting there trying to think of what is going to be this perfect opening statement, then I can sometimes get a little discouraged or not get as far into writing as I would like. So treat every paragraph at first as a middle paragraph to let yourself just get it out there. Just start writing. Your draft is a draft. That's not what you're turning in, and you'll have plenty of time to refine it, revisit it, and shorten it or lengthen it as needed. So I've mentioned some of these do's and don'ts. So don't make your personal statement an extended resume. Again, if you do want to highlight work experience, that's totally great. Maybe pick one or two experiences versus paragraph by paragraph. And then make sure that there's more anecdotes in there. So maybe if you were teaching English as a second language, don't just run through, I made lesson plans and I gave lectures and I responded to emails. Talk about, I had this one student in my class and they were really worried about securing a job. And so I worked with them personally to come up with this role play activity where I was a client at a restaurant and we went through some typical phrases that they might be able to use as they were trying to become a server. Like giving that particular anecdote shows a little bit more about who you are and gives me a better glimpse into what did you do in that work experience than you would ever put on a resume. That's a way to take it and make it more personal than your resume. And I would say don't try and put a joke in because a lot of times it lands flat. If you are somebody who's like, but I make puns all the time, and that's just an inherent part of my personality, and I really feel like I need to put one in. Okay, but still, I would really recommend ask a lot of people if it sounds okay, because you never know who's on your committee, and some professors on the committee might not like insertions of humor and puns and things of that nature. Talked a little bit about keeping it positive. So if you have a difficult experience that you're highlighting, like maybe you had a terrible boss, and so you really want to go into labor and employment law because that terrible experience with your boss drove you to see what your rights as an employee were, and you really pushed back against what they were doing. Don't focus on just how terrible they were for a lengthy period of time. Focus on what you did in that situation. Highlight your positive traits. There is very, very few times where I would say having a quotation at all is necessary in a personal statement. And if you are talking about another person, especially if it's a mentor, keep it brief, maximum a paragraph, because at the end of the day, we are looking to admit you. And so I don't want to get to the end of the personal statement and say, wow, this other person that they talked about sounds really great. I would love to have them in the class, but I don't know who this applicant is. And then again, at the end of the day, we need to hear you. So being so general, like I had an amazing study abroad experience and I really learned a lot about myself. It was my first time being out of the country and I got to experience new cultures and new people and see what it was like to be in a country where English is not the primary language. That's so general that could describe most anybody's study abroad experience. But giving a particular anecdote, like maybe there was a time that you were trying to navigate public transportation in Croatia and you got on the wrong train line and you had to pivot and interpret a map when it wasn't even in English. And what did you do in that moment? Like giving us those anecdotes are really what helps it shine. And the big one is not following the format that the school has given you or what prompts the school has given you is a really easy way to have your application move lower down the pile, even if everything else is stellar. But being that you're applying to law school, being a lawyer, you are going to have to be so detail focused and really follow instructions. And so doing that from the get-go, showing that you are reading the instructions, you can pay attention to those details, helps that review committee really know that you are going to be able to use those skills in the future. So pay attention to topics, font size, page limit, spacing, things of that nature. One of the folks in my office, because we have a 2 page limit, if you go past 2 pages, she will stop reading. So it doesn't matter how much you have left. And you have to go in with that mindset that if you don't follow directions, some folks on the committee might just simply stop. You don't want that to happen to your personal statement and application. And then on the do side of things, focus on who you are, why are you going to law school? Some law schools ask you to talk about why this school. And it might also be important to share a little bit about why now. Are you going straight through after undergrad? Why do you feel like that's the best step versus taking some time off? Or maybe are taking time off and going into a completely different career path at first. Why are you making the pivot to law then? And so addressing that might be something you need to do. After your first draft, give it to family, friends, and mentors to give feedback on, does this sound like you? Is there anything about your experiences that you're sharing that they would say, oh, maybe add this because this was a really important detail that I felt like you shared when you told me this story. Don't give it to them to ask you to answer, is this a good personal statement topic? That's where your pre-law advisor is a great resource. I'll also just note, there are a lot of people on Reddit who have a lot of opinions on whether or not their personal statement is why they got into a particular law school. That may be true, it may not be true. So Reddit is not the best place for personal statement advice. And so it can be helpful for maybe generating some ideas for you of like, oh yeah, I never thought that I could write about that. That would be a really great personal statement for myself. Fine, but don't worry about following anything that anybody said on Reddit. I'll also just note if you are going straight through and you're able to utilize your University Writing Center as a resource for proofreading and just grammatical checks, do that as well. That's an easy flag too for an admissions committee if there are grammatical errors. And then I'll drop these links in the chat in a moment. But there are a few different resources. I know I just mentioned Reddit, but there was a really great Ask Me Anything from a 7th Age writing advisor on Reddit. So somebody that is verified, was not an applicant, works in this field. Then there's also a really great podcast, if that's more your speed, statements from a few folks at T14 law schools. And then if you haven't seen any of Dean Z from the University of Michigan's videos on YouTube, she has some really great content. And so I'll drop the link for a short video on personal statements as well. At the end of the day, I know that all of us are sort of competing for all of your applications, but we're a real collegial environment. So sharing resources that other people put out is something that our community is really positive about doing. So I'll drop those links in the chat in a moment and then open it up to questions as well. So give me a moment to grab those links and take time to go ahead and start typing up your questions.
So we had a question. If someone wished to apply in the fall of 2026, when would it be ideal for them to submit an application?
Awesome. I would say if at all possible, please try and do it by November 1st. And again, this doesn't mean if you don't do it by then that you aren't going to get admitted. However, it puts you in the best possible position for getting that yes, getting good scholarship information. And so if you're taking like the January LSAT or later as your first one and applying after that point in time, that's where it might be a little more difficult for you. If you took the September LSAT and you get your score back and you're like, I really need to retake the LSAT, and you're looking at those November or January tests, it also could be worthwhile to ask your different law schools that you're considering, are you a school that would allow me to submit what I have? And then if I take this later test and I get an improved score, would you re-review me for admission decision and or scholarshiping? That's something that we do. Not every school does it, but that could be also a good way to balance what's going to make your application the strongest, but also your timing a little bit better.
And then could you also describe maybe if you remember any students who had like maybe some red flags in their personal statements and when it was described well?
Yeah, so I feel like something that is unfortunately a pretty common experience is folks having an issue with their mental health during their time in undergrad, and that resulted in a really poor semester on their transcript. And so addressing it like, okay, my sophomore year, first semester, I was experiencing a mental health crisis, and I did not do the steps at that point in time that I realize now could have really helped me better address my grades during that time. So, for example, I did not reach out to professors and ask for extensions or explain what was going on. Or withdraw from any classes. And now, after going through that experience, this is what I'm doing to address my mental health. But I also know that if anything were to happen in the future, this is exactly my plan. I would talk to professors right away about extensions. I would talk to professors right away about if I need to withdraw from the class. Like having that plan moving forward and focusing more so on what have they done and having that maturity to realize what were some of the issues that they had that resulted in this, even though at the end of the day, we also recognize going through a mental health crisis is obviously a very, very difficult time in it of itself. So again, focusing on that positive side of things, what have you done since then to grow, and what would allow us to see, okay, if this problem arises in the future, they are well equipped to address it now versus repeat exactly what happened as well.
Thank you. So kind of a focus on growth and showing how they grew from that experience.
Very much so.
And then could you also describe maybe some adjectives that maybe people put that were well-meaning, but were not very received well, or adjectives that you think would be good for students to use in their personal statement?
Yeah, so I would say there are cultural differences between law schools. And so there have been folks who have written a personal statement about how they are very competitive and driven. And while that is also a good thing and something that maybe helped propel them through undergrad and helped them get really strong grades and a really strong LSAT, focusing on just how competitive they were made me as a reviewer go, I don't know if they would actually like it here or thrive in this classroom environment because that's really not the culture of the students here. So it didn't necessarily mean that that was a bad personal statement or a bad trait, but that was something that just didn't fit with us. And was on a panel recently where somebody else talked about how they had an applicant that was a 180 4.0, so stellar stats, but talked about how they were very solo focused in their academic. They thrive really well from being an introvert. And again, that just didn't fit the culture of that particular school. So they were like, even though they had those really great stats, I voted waitlist for them. And so being clued into a little bit of what are the students like at this school can be helpful in the process. A lot of schools do allow opportunities to connect with student ambassadors, current students, where you can hear a little bit more of what the student culture is like, what the vibes are like.
Thank you. And that was all the questions that I saw. Students, if you have any questions, feel free to ask now. All right, well, I'm not seeing any more, but thank you again so much for coming out and
Totally.
telling us all this information. If you could drop your email again into the chat, that would be great.
Yes.
And thank you again for everything.
Totally. And I'm also dropping real quick the link for our one-on-one virtual appointments with myself and with my colleague who's another assistant director. And we also have, I think, now over 20 student ambassadors on there. So if you want to chat with a current law student, um, that's a really great resource as well. Happy to chat with you one-on-one. And best of luck in the application process. You will do really great things, I'm sure of it.
Thank you, Megan. And
Yeah.
also, students, if you could fill out the end of presentation survey that I dropped into the chat, that would be great. Thank you again for all of your help.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.